I'm so rusty, you guys. The title of this episode is reconciliation, or whatever Lowell decides to do with it in editing. But that was one thing that we wanted you to talk about at retreat, to share your testimony on reconciling with your mom. And it's honestly surprising that you guys were able to reconcile. And I just think it's a beautiful story. And so we kind of talked about it. I was like, well, she's going to be talking about this on retreat. Maybe I can convince her to do it on a podcast. So, but thank you for coming. And thank you for being willing again and sharing your testimony at retreat. I know that was a big deal. And now for all of the internet, whoever wants to watch it, it's going to be on there forever.
I can understand why reconciliation would be difficult. I mean, because it is a very intentional. It's like forgiveness. It's a daily intentional act. And sometimes if you don't get the reconciliation, it doesn't look the way you want it to look.
Yeah.
And so some people have problems with that. So I can see why it's hard for people and the thing is, and for the people involved, it may not look the same to each other, if that makes sense. So reconciliation with my mom, quick backstory, my mom left me and my 4 siblings when I was 6, and my dad and my stepmom raised us, and so it was very hard, traumatic. It creates rejection and abandonment issues, the whole thing. But we had a great my growing up was not difficult with my dad. My stepmom is wonderful, actually. But when she comes back in your life, it's like you have all these ideas. You grieve what you wanted, what you thought you wanted, what you had, what you didn't have. So there's a big ball of emotions that go along with it. But like you and I were talking about, I think people mistake reconciliation with forgiveness, and it's 2 separate acts. Usually it involves forgiveness before there can be reconciliation, but reconciliation can look different to different people. And just like, reconciliation, like if you take a bank account, it's like, okay, before salvation, your spiritual life is basically in the negative. With Christ, it comes back to 0 with joy and all the things that come with your salvation. That's where it adds up.
Yeah.
Well, in a relationship with reconciliation, it can either be, you can just like forgiveness, you can choose to forgive them. It can be one-sided, and you can reconcile to the fact that that's the end of the relationship, like you close an account.
Yeah.
You can choose to reconcile to where there's a partial relationship, if you will, but it looks different to everybody, and a lot of people struggle with it because it doesn't look the way they want it to, or they don't get, and because reconciliation, you've got personalities involved, you've got are they saved, are they unsaved, how does the relationship look? Is it equally yoked? But as a parent, you don't generally, whether they're saved or not saved. But my mom got saved late in her life, and she asked for forgiveness through many, many struggles in her life, and it made it easier to reconcile. Now, we would interact throughout the years and things like that, but I had to learn how to engage with her. Yeah. What was healthy and safe for me, because of so many wounds that have happened over the years of being so young and then wanting, and then you get what you think you want, and it doesn't turn out that way. So, but that's pretty much. That's the basis of that part of reconciliation with her. I just had to accept it for what it was, who she was. She asked for forgiveness, and because Christ commands us, forgive if you want to be forgiven, basically. Yeah. So, and not only that, I wanted to.
Yeah. You wanted to be obedient.
I wanted to be obedient, but I also wanted to have a relationship with my mom. Yeah. Even though it was difficult. Yeah. Again, what I thought I wanted versus what I got. I had to choose to accept it or not. Yeah. And either enjoy it or not.
Well, I like what you said about how reconciliation is different from forgiveness, because I often think people think that's synonymous. And forgiveness is when, because I had a bunch of forgiveness that I had to do. With both of my parents, over the years, but specifically with my dad, was he never apologized for the things that he did or we were a part of, and that just really frustrated me. And it took me 10 years of trying to figure out how to forgive him. And I'm Googling, this is before AI, Googling, how do you forgive someone if they're not remorseful? And, and and it just took such a long time. But then I think what did it for me was like, I realized that I don't deserve forgiveness. And neither does my dad.
Right.
How great that I'm able to extend that to him. But again, that took me 10 years. And it's hard when they're not remorseful, because it's like, well, it's easy if someone's remorseful, and then it's like, yeah, you can move on. Like you reconcile as restoring a relationship, and you both move forward with like the same end goal in mind. And but when you're doing that with just forgiveness, and it's just you, like it's mainly for you. The forgiveness is for you. It's not really for that other person. But then you can't reconcile unless both parties are willing.
Right.
And so that's also tough. But your mom finally came around.
She did. And when she asked for forgiveness, I mean, when she said it wasn't your fault or any of our kids' fault. Yes. She said that she had and this is the other part of the testimony was, you have to understand you didn't live their life. And I'm not saying you have to excuse every bad thing they've ever done to you, but you haven't lived their life. And, she stated that, it wasn't our fault. She would have messed our lives up like she had messed her life up. So that humility and realizing, hey, I'm not perfect. Because all we saw was a distance of her living her life how she wanted to, and it didn't involve us.
Yeah.
So, and she looked so happy, and you think that, but then, of course, it took her salvation and realizing that she didn't deserve God's forgiveness, but she had it.
Yeah.
And, but a lot of times we want forgiveness, but when somebody's hurt us, it's harder for us to forgive the same way. And we don't realize that. And we don't realize what they've gone through. So what is normal to them is not normal to us. So what we think they should be remorseful for or offer forgiveness for, you think that would be common sense or natural. It's not.
Yeah, or like, because there was one thing I asked my dad. I didn't talk to him from the time I was 12 till I was 17. I didn't mention this in my message that I shared at retreat, but he called me up one day and was, he had tried to call me for years, and I just ignored it. And for some reason, I decided to pick up the phone this one day on my way home from school. And we're just talking, and he keeps bad-mouthing my mom. And I said, if you keep on, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And then he would stop, and then he would just keep on. And there was one time I asked him for an apology. I said, Dad, like I mentioned what happened at the retreat. It's like, Dad, what you did to me on that day, that was really hurtful, and I would like an apology. And he said, Anna, I'm not the type of man to apologize. And that was like just a moment of realization. At 17 years old, he will most likely never change. There's a 99% chance that he will not change. And I'm like, okay. And then time went by. He died when I was 22. And I remember my brother calling me, because I hadn't seen him since I was 12. So, 10 years had passed. And I remember my brother calling me on my way home from work and telling me that Dad had died. And the first words out of my mouth were, I'm so sorry. Because it wasn't my loss. And then I had the realization of, he's gone. There is now a 100% chance that he did not change. And now we cannot reconcile. And that was really, I want to say hurtful. Like, that was just a very difficult time, because now you mourn what you can't have, like the possibility of, what could have been. And it's like, but I couldn't do anything else, and a lot of the time it's like, oh, if I would have just done this, or if I was like, no, you were the child. You were a little tiny child, 17 years old at the time. And it's like, that was their responsibility. You did all that you could. And so a lot of like the conflict and like forgiveness that I've experienced in my life, it's always been one-sided. It's never been like, we've never been able to restore things. And so like to hear your story with your mom, it's so beautiful, because your mom saw that she was a sinner, and she abandoned you guys to protect you, in her own words, from the way that she was living. And like you said in your message during women's retreat, is that like what a blessing that was, because your stepmom and your dad, like even though they had their failures, like they took really good care of you guys. and you have a good relationship with your dad to this day. And
Oh yeah.
it's just beautiful how like God chose to protect you through that, because like what would you've experienced if, you know, she was around doing all that stuff?
And that's the way I have to look at. I know that's not probably the real reason. I mean, I know she did not leave. She did not solely leave to protect us.
Yeah.
Looking back, she saw that was one blessing in it.
Yeah.
And that's where some of us have. Well, that's where some of the struggle has been over the years to forgive, whether it's one-sided or not. Was we know that wasn't the sole reason, but she found and the thing is, it may not have been her reason, but it was the truth.
Yeah.
And what would have happened differently, because I wouldn't change the way our lives wound, the way we
Right.
were able to live our lives without her in it,
Right.
essentially. But you made the statement about your dad. You didn't get the chance to reconcile, and you didn't talk to him for 10 years. Essentially, technically, you did reconcile. You reconciled to close that account.
Yeah, I didn't get to reconcile with him.
Right.
And that's what it's like. I wanted that. And you know, my husband and I talk about it now. It's like, just think about how different life would have been if we could have reconciled. It's like, would my parents still have been married? Like, if he could have reconciled with my mom, like, what would that have been like? And he died alone. And like, that hurts me. And like, just makes me really sad that he had to go through all of that. But it's like, but all of that, like, he reaped what he sowed. And it's like, oh, if he just would have done this, and like, this would have been different. And then like, my kids could have actually had like a natural grandfather, because like, all the men in our family are gone. And like, he has my stepdad, like ex-stepdad, as a grandpa, and then my husband's great grandpa. But it's like, he doesn't have like any like natural grandparents, because my husband's dad's not in the picture, and then my dad's gone. It's like, just like, how different would that have been? But yeah, like, I didn't get to reconcile with him. I had to reconcile with the fact that this is what I got.
Well, and just like the women's retreat, nothing is wasted. And I chose to look at her leaving as protection. And but I had decided that. I mean, I had in God's word, I had discovered that a long time ago. It was protection for us, and God gave us a great life and childhood. In that, I just had to choose that joy in that protection that didn't involve her for years. And to be quite honest, as I got older, and even after forgiveness and reconciliation, it still had to be a limited relationship. The boundaries still had to be there. Simply because I had to accept who she was as a person. She's saved, and she chose Christ and salvation and asked for forgiveness, but she still was her, and the hurt would still come in waves. And but I did love her. I did want to help her. And you mentioned this. Once we realized how much we require forgiveness and need it, and we're not sinless, and we need that. One of her bouts, when I was helping her,
when she was sick.
When she was sick, she needed help with groceries, so I met her at the grocery store, and I found her in the grocery store, and she's on the aisle and she's crying, and I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "I don't deserve your help."
Do you think that was manipulation?
No,
that was like just
because immediately the first thing that came to mind was, I said, if we got what we deserved, we would all be in hell.
Right.
And those words came to me instantly. And I believe that. And sometimes it would, because I helped her for a while in that aspect. But the thing is, I knew it was obedience on my part, whether I liked it, disagreed with it didn't matter. It was just obedience. And it was very emotional. It was very hard. And I would joyfully agree to do it. And then afterwards, I'd be like, "What did I do?"
Yeah, it'd just be so drained.
It would be so draining afterwards. And because the thing is when they do come back in your life, you tend to not give them any credit for moving forward. You still do, even though you don't want to do that. It has to be a very intentional process to do it. Part of me wanted to say, "No, you don't," but then that's not what God called me to say. He was like, "No, you were doing the right thing for the right reason," and I did want to help her.
Yeah.
But again, it's like that flesh would just want to surface and want to say the things you wanted to say back then.
Yeah.
But no, we're moving forward with the new relationship. So
it just makes me think of when we were in accountability. You're like, I have nothing to say, and you just lean back and cross your legs.
I said I have nothing nice to say, so I'm not going to say anything.
That's good. You have good self-control. I don't know. And there's more stuff that we're not going to get to touch on in today's episode, but just being abandoned by her mom, and like she went to jail for a time for some of the things that she did, and that's where she found, or Jesus found her.
Yep.
And just going through that, and like her apologizing, and then you getting to care for her in her last days, her last years. How long was she sick that you cared for? Was like a couple years? That
she had 2 different illnesses. So she had stage 4 breast cancer, and I helped her with her. I would take her to chemo and radiation.
Okay.
So I would do that, and then there was a lapse in that, and then when her husband passed away, actually, and that's another story I don't really want to talk about, but I did help her because she was struggling to get him to his doctor's appointments a few times, so I met her and helped her with that as well. But then when she, at the last few years of her life, she struggled with something that, and again, this is where it's hard to know what somebody's life is like and what their normal looks like. She started having issues, and it basically involved it was her stomach. Yeah. And the doctor, we were 2 or 3, 4 months into this, and me and my siblings, my sisters helped get her to the ER a few times and things like that. But when they finally got to the resolution that, hey, we've never seen anybody, infants normally die from this problem. And normally we might have seen a person that's maybe 20 or 30 years old make it with this problem, but we've never seen anybody make it in their 70s, ever. And what she was living with was so painful, and
she wasn't eating.
In the end, she wasn't. No.
Yeah. So she was like what? How many pounds? Like 90.
She made
rail thin.
I think she was like 91 when she passed.
Okay.
So
very sick.
Very, very sick. So, but again, she's lived with this her whole life, and they're like, we don't see people like this. So her normal life, we would take for, it's painful, and the things she had said over the years, I didn't give her any credit for. Yeah. And there's many reasons why I wouldn't, but because she had not been a trustworthy person to this point. So the things that she would complain about, you would think that it was manipulation or excuses, and while there was many of those, this one was actually true. But to her, she didn't know it was a real problem.
Yeah,
it was just her life.
Yeah.
And so you would take it as that, and because she'd been like that for years, one of my siblings would tell me that she's manipulating. I'm like, no, I just know what I'm dealing with. Just because I understand the situation. I'm just choosing not to act or respond to this. I'm just telling you what has happened, and I'm just not going to give into it. Yeah. I'm not. I do see what's happening. I do recognize it. I'm just giving her credit for who she is. I'm just not going to hold it against her. That's just who she is. Yeah. And I recognize that. And you just learn. That's I mentioned that at the retreat about boundaries. You can still engage if you choose to. You just have to choose your boundaries.
Well, and I think too, like with reconciliation, you said it looks different for everybody. And I think that's such a good point, because like we don't have like 100% reconciliation where everything is just like perfect and like there are rainbows and little birds fluttering around, tweeting and all the things. And it's like you do have to instill boundaries. And I think too, like just with parents, that's difficult, especially being an adult and then like a parent yourself, is like what's appropriate. And like we talked about that a lot on retreat too, just some like stuff with other people's parents and the boundaries that they're setting. And it's like because you have to put boundaries and protections there for yourself. And I think often, like Wendy and I were talking about this in preparation for retreat, is that oftentimes boundaries gets like a bad rap. It's like, oh, well, you're just cutting them out of your life because of blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I'm putting a boundary up, and they know what they have to do to get, like, my dad didn't come to our wedding. He wasn't invited. And I remember I had a friend of mine at the time, she said, like, I was 21 when I got married. And so she asked, like, oh, is your dad not coming? I said, no, I'm not inviting him. And she's like, but it's your dad. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, that would go easily from like the best day of my life to the worst day of my life if he came. And she didn't fully understand like the whole history between us and, just like all the things, as Karina Wilson would say. And so a lot of the times it's like, oh, well, you're being too harsh. And like I was listening to a podcast some time ago, and it's like, why are kids today, like adult kids, like, adult children, like with their parents, why are they putting like all these boundaries? Why are they cutting them off? It's like, well, because they're not wanting to reconcile. They're just wanting to cut them out because I don't want to deal with you and like all the things, instead of working to restore that relationship. And then there were times when, like I said, I tried to restore as much as I could or put boundaries up with my dad, and it wasn't, like, he wasn't willing to meet those expectations that I had or those requirements that I had. I'm like, okay, well, then you're not coming in. You know, like, you didn't get to come to my wedding. He died before we had kids. And, like, he didn't get to see my brother get married because he died before that. And, like, same with his kids. And it's like, man, like, how, like I said earlier, how different would life have been if, like, he would have reconciled, if we could have reconciled, like, 100%. And I just think, too, like, going back to your story, because this isn't about me, it's about you, is how you were able to serve your mom. And I touched on this earlier, like, how you were able to serve her in her last days. And I know that was really hard for you because that was the time, like, when we were in accountability together. And but just seeing the beauty in that, like, with her doing everything and her humbling herself, even though she still had manipulative tendencies, because, like, that doesn't just go away overnight. Like, you have to really work at that. And, you know, she was at the end of her life, and you kind of just get what you get at that point. But the fact that you were still more concerned with obedience and honoring your mother in those last days, I think that's a huge testament of your growth.
Well, I also believe that you do unto others. And my biggest thing was just and I said this at retreat, I don't like for people to feel unloved or unwanted. I don't want anyone to feel. Because you know what that feels like. I know what it feels like, including her. Yeah. And I genuinely, that's just who I am. And I didn't want to compromise what I believe and what the root of, that's in my heart. And I can still be mad. I can still be irritated because we do fight the flesh. And, like I said, it's a daily intentional choice, and every interaction you can choose. And sometimes you choose wisely and godly, and sometimes you don't. And then you have to either repent and ask for forgiveness, or, humble yourself again and start over. Yeah. It's never perfect. It doesn't, and that's the other thing is people think, well, we talked about it, we forgave, and we're just going to go on like nothing happened. Well, that doesn't always work. And that's where the resentment builds up. That's where the bitterness comes from, because when you act like nothing happened, and I'm not saying torture them with it or throw it in their face, but, there has to be some restoration. There has to be some growing and moving forward. I'm not saying act like it didn't happen, but don't
hold it over their head.
Well, don't hold it over their head, but also that person who offended you should have an opportunity to grow. And if they don't, that's where the boundary comes in. And that's where you have to decide, okay, am I going to allow this or am I not going to allow this? Yeah. But yeah, it wasn't easy, and I didn't always have the best attitude. And so I wanted to do the right thing, and I try to do the right thing. And when given the opportunity, I try to do the right thing. And, and the thing is, she was a widow. Yeah. And when she died, and I just personally don't want to be left in a house by myself at 60, 70, 80, 90 years old with no resources. And some people have said, well, that was her own doing. And I understand that. I do understand that.
But you still extended mercy.
And because I would want the same mercy extended to me. Yeah. It didn't look great all the time, but all I could see was, and I have this compassion. Even if you're not my favorite person, if you called me and asked me for help and I knew you didn't have resources, options, and I'm not saying that would be my last resort. I would hope that I would choose to help you. And that's where, I don't see myself saying no. I might help you find options if it's not something I can help with. But to totally just leave somebody abandoned, and so it's been said, well, she deserves it. You could say that. Well,
like you said, that scripture, I can't remember the reference, but, treat others the way that you want to be treated. I was like, look it up, because I've been trying to teach my oldest that he's been saying things like calling people poo-poo heads. And he called an adult that at the park one time, and I made him apologize to the adult. And Then him and his cousin will get together and they'll start doing it to other people. And I'm like, would you like to be called that? And he's like, no. I said, well, God tells us in the Bible to treat others the way that we want to be treated. So give me that reference so I can actually teach him that verse.
So Luke 6:31, and as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them.
Yeah.
But the one scripture, and I mentioned this, was Ephesians 4:31 and 32.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the one that Miss Suzanne worked with me on for years.
So Miss Suzanne, for those of you who don't know, is Miss Gwen, our pastor's wife. It's her mother who has now passed away, but she was a big deal here.
But this is what she would remind me of, and it stuck with me. But there's one word in here that it's about compassion. Mm-hmm. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. It says be compassionate. And the other, I think in the Holman Standard is compassionate to one another. And that has stuck with me for years. And I'm like, you know what, just as Christ, I mean, he didn't have to be kind and compassionate. He didn't have to. And I'm grateful that compassion is given to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't deserve it. And I choose, I mean, even if she didn't deserve it, to the end of your day, do you want to be, if given the opportunity, do you want to continue to be mean to somebody, even in their last days? No. Your prayer is that they get saved. She did get saved. Yeah. And some people will say, well, and I've had this said to me, well, all the things, basically she wouldn't act like that if she was saved. And I'm like,
she was saved.
I'm not going to judge someone's salvation. Yeah. I'm not going to do it. And I know that she did more obedience than some people that claim to be Christians every day.
Well, I mean, did she go to like a Bible believing church? Was she discipled and like all of these things? And like there are some new Christians, like what's that dude? He's famous, Jelly Roll.
Oh yeah.
Is that
yeah?
Like there, and then his wife just came out with like they're like new Christians. Mm-hmm. Baby Christians according to them. And I think Jelly Roll just opened up a bar in like on Broadway in Nashville, and I don't know what it's titled, but it's like I think it has a picture of like his wife like half naked, and he's like okay with it, and he's like promoting it, and then like his wife has a new book that's coming out, and it's like it's referencing being naked as like she's bearing all, like she's showing everything and like what's happened in her life and testimony, but it's like okay. Honey, sweetie baby, I don't think you understand. Like, God tells us to be modest, and he tells us to like put the old things away, and like we are a new creation, like we've said on this podcast before, just in this episode. And it's like, so you have to extend grace with like those new believers, because like there are some things that I still learn, and I've been a Christian the majority of my life at this point. And like you said, we're not ones to judge. Like we can hold them accountable to what Scripture says, and like are they bearing fruit that we can see. But your mom humbled herself. Like, I don't know a lot of parents who have abandoned their kids that would humble themselves and ask for their kids' forgiveness for how they acted. And then be able to restore those relationships. Whether it's like, you know, like you can't expect that everything's just going to be perfect. Like you have two broken people who've had a lifetime of sin. And like, how old were you guys? How old were you when she became a Christian?
40-something, 40, yeah.
So you've gone through all of this in your like 40-something years of life at that point. And then you're trying to work with that with your mom, or work through that with your mom. It's like, yeah, like you have two imperfect people who are trying to make sense of all this. And it's like, I would call that a win. She did have manipulative tendencies from what like you shared with us in her last days and stuff, but like I said earlier, that does not just like
I would choose to be I would just choose to be cordial.
Yeah.
Or
you just set boundaries. Yeah. And like, okay, mom, well, we're not going to talk about that, and or that's not true, and that's going to end there, and then you move on. But yeah, I just think like your story is such a beautiful picture of what reconciliation is and what it can be for other people, even if it's not like you said, like my instance of reconciliations, like I had to reconcile the fact that like I knew my dad and I were never going to be able to restore. And someone asked me, well, how did you know when you forgave your dad? And I was like, honestly, it was after he died, and I viewed his body in the casket. And I just looked at him and I was like, I'm not mad anymore. Like, I forgive you for all these things. And like my uncle, my dad's brother-in-law is a pastor, and we were sitting at dinner after the service and everything. And I was just trying to make sense, because like I didn't believe he was a Christian with like all these things that he did and said. And like I didn't see any fruit. He walked the walk, he talked the talk. He didn't walk the walk type thing. And I was talking to my uncle about it, and he's like, well, God's grace. And he mentioned the prodigal son. And I'm like, but I don't think he ever was a prodigal son, and like that type thing. And then so like trying to reconcile all of that, but just even talking to his sisters, of getting a better picture of who he was as a child. I'm like, this explains a lot. And like he had time in the Army. I'm like, that explains a lot. Like he was a parachuter in the Army, or whatever they call him. I don't know. He's in the 82nd Airborne. He'd probably be sick to know that, like, I couldn't remember what that is. He was very passionate about that. But no, like, he jumped out of planes and did all this other stuff, and he, like, fought in Grenada, like, active battle in Grenada. I'm like, well, this explains so much. So it's like after he died, I had more humanity for him. Like, I saw him more as a human, more compassion. And I'm like, okay, he's just like this dude who's just selfish. It's like there are reasons he was like this, but he chose not to do anything with them, and that's like, I believe he reaped what he sowed. But just reconciling the fact that we couldn't do that just really sucks, to put it plainly. But even just with the forgiveness, it's like I was able to forgive him once he died. And looking back, I honestly think it was like he died in an accident, so it was like very freak thing. A couple of weeks before he died, I remember praying for him that he would repent. Just being in tears, weeping for God to humble him and for him to repent. And I think it was actually that moment when I was able to forgive my dad. And it's just like, it's not going to look the same for everyone. And so that's when, like, you had the story and I asked you to share it. Well, first I asked you to share about submission, but then they said that, no, we want her to just talk about reconciliation. And he's like, they don't trust me to talk about submission. But like, just knowing you for so long and that journey that you went through with your mom, I just thought it was so beautiful.
It was long. It was hard. I've had a lot of, and I've experienced a lot of loss in my life as well. So fortunately and unfortunately, I was given the opportunity to learn at a young age. The next day is not granted. I would rather choose to love and be wrong than be bitter, angry, stealing the joy out of my daily life, and then not give them the benefit of the doubt, because we don't. And it's like, you can be mad at your parents until you have kids, and then you experience some of the things that they experience. Then you realize, my
parents were doing the best that they knew how to.
I asked my stepmom yesterday. I said, "How did you do this?" Because there was 5 of us, and she raised all 5 of us.
How old were you guys, like all of your siblings, when she came in the picture?
Okay, so if I was 6, that means my sister. See, I got 2 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. So that means the oldest was 9. The next one was 8. I was 6, 4, and 2. And that's the other thing. As I got older, I went through several stages of missing her more, angrier, don't want to see you, don't care, then see her, and just all the I told you, it was like, it was just a big ball of emotions. But I went through all that. And the older Casey got, I was like, you love this person so much, how can you walk away? That's where the anger and the bitterness comes in. And you can choose to live in that, but it also destroys your daily life. It destroys everything. And I just I'm like, I chose, that's not who I want to be. I was angry long enough. I told you I was a crybaby.
I was too.
I was a crybaby. I've gotten better, but I just didn't want to be that person. I'm like, I can choose to love regardless and be wrong, because that's what Christ does for me every day. And they're going to be who they're going to be. And I don't live their life. And I don't know what their life looks like at home. I don't know what they've been through. And like I said about my mom, I don't wish her childhood on anyone. So
because you got a lot of respect for your mom and a lot of understanding and compassion and learning.
I got a lot of understanding because I did have a great childhood. I did have a great life, and I'm grateful today. And I'm choosing to see God's protection throughout my whole life. The things that have been removed whether it was good, bad, or ugly, as protection. I'm choosing to be grateful for those changes, whether it's a loss or just somebody leaving willingly, or me choosing not to continue that daily relationship. I choose to be grateful. I'm choosing joy. Now, there's some days it's harder than others, but I would rather live that than being angry and bitter of what wasn't.
Yeah.
Or what I thought could have been, because if you, like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't look like what you think it's going to look like. So you can be angry and bitter on what you think you lost and still be wrong.
Yeah.
Because you can get everything you wanted and you're still going to be angry and bitter because it's not going to look like what you wanted.
Well, and it's like, I don't struggle with the bitterness anymore. It's more of like, I don't understand, like having kids of my own, like I don't understand how he could have done something like that. But it's like, I had to apologize to my 3.5-year-old twice on the way to church this morning. Like once as we were leaving the house, and another one because we were driving, because I just snapped at him. But I never got apologies. And so I apologized to my kids, but it's like,
But you're doing that because you didn't get that.
Yes.
So you have learned and grown in being a parent by what you didn't have.
But yes, but you remember in my message that I shared for the longest time, like when my dad died, I said, my kids will never feel the way that you made me feel. And I made that declaration, and I was going to stick to it. And then I was 22. I didn't have my first until I was 27. So 6 years had passed after I made that promise. And he's 2 or whatever. I'm pregnant with our second, and our boys are 22 months apart. And he did something, and I lost it on him. I started screaming at him, and he looks at me with those beautiful blue eyes. Mommy, you scared me. And then I immediately had that realization of my dad scared me. I'm my dad. Like I wasn't, but just focusing on being what I did wrong was I was focusing on so much not being like my dad. I was becoming my dad instead of focusing on being more like Christ and becoming more like him. And I think that's where, like, us parents who had childhoods that we want to make different for our kids, we get stuck on those things, and it turns into bitterness. Like, I can't believe, like, I remember my husband, when we had our first, we were in the hospital. I, like, had just gotten out of my first shower after having the baby. You know how big of a deal that is. And I asked him to come help me and, like, get out of the shower and get cleaned up and stuff. And he came to me crying, and I'm like, well, what's wrong with the baby? Freaking out. And he's like, I just don't get it, because he was abandoned by his dad. And I just looked at him and said, honey, I don't either. He's like, I just can't look at this little baby that I just met, and, like, I don't understand. But he chose to have forgiveness for his dad. And so I like what you said of, you can choose to be bitter. Like, that takes more work. To be bitter and angry and stubborn instead of just forgiving. Because like I said earlier, forgiveness is more for ourselves instead of the other person, because bitterness will eat us alive. It doesn't do anything for the other person unless you're just yelling at them all the time, So, yeah, I just really am thankful for you sharing your story, and like on the internet as well as the women's retreat. And I think that I know it helps some of the women at retreat a lot, just knowing that they're not alone, and then also like helping them, like, okay, well, what boundaries do you need to set up? And that also, you said restoration and reconciliation looks different for everybody. And so thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We're going to go ahead and close today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, deuces.